Our speaker is Lucas Kunce, Democrat candidate for the U.S. Senate in 2022. Lucas is a native of Jefferson City, a former Marine officer who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Now he works at a nonprofit that fights for the middle class and against corporate monopoly power. Welcome, Lucas.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm really excited to be here. Boone County is kind of a second home for me. Growing up outside of Jeff City, my grandparents lived right off of West Boulevard there. And so we were up there all the time. You know, my parents would drive us past the Billy Goat Cliffs when I was a kid, because they used to have billy goats on the river bluffs on the way up, which was pretty cool. And so we'd watch those and then get up there and, you know, spent much of my childhood there and then law school there. So yeah, great to be talking to you guys. And I used to work at Focus on Learning, which some of you may know. Anna Chippendale runs that. It used to be downtown. Now I think she's moved it out west since I worked there. And there's a small chance that when I worked at True Green Chem Lawn while I was in law school, I may have done your lawn at one point or another. So that's kind of exciting too. Interesting day. I just wanted to, you know, take a moment to just, you know, with Nicole Galloway's announcement saying she's not going to run again. I know it wasn't in your notes or announcements, but you know, she was.
I didn't know.
Yeah, she announced it today, and she was such a fierce watchdog for everybody, and really going after corruption. And just, you know, I thought I'd take a second to say, you know, how great a job she did, and how proud of her we all, I'm assuming, are. I am. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess now I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, a little more than I just did. So you kind of got the summary. You know, I was in the Marine Corps for 13 years. I was born and raised in Jeff City. My grandparents were in Columbia. Just kind of mid-Missouri was my home, and it was just like a magical place to grow up down in Jeff City. I don't know how familiar people are with Jeff, but I grew up just east of Lincoln University in what most people would consider kind of like a lower middle class neighborhood. You know, we never had a lot of money, but we had lots of friends, and there were always kids running all over, and everybody's parents would take care of us, you know, in and out of people's houses. Some people even had like name brand Pop-Tarts, which was pretty cool. So, you know, those poor parents would get all the kids over at their house. But yeah, I don't think that as a kid, I really realized how magical it was until I turned about 8 years old. My littlest sister was born, and she had a heart condition and had to actually be airlifted to St. Louis to have an open heart surgery. And so she was born at Boone Hospital. I was born at Boone Hospital. We all born at Boone Hospital there. So she was airlifted out of there. And this is when you really find out like who your friends are, right? When something bad happens. While my parents, well, I'll just set this up. My sister's fine. She survived the open heart surgeries. Everything was good. So I don't want to leave you on that cliff. But yeah, like my parents had to go to St. Louis for weeks and then months on end. And, you know, everybody in our old neighborhood took us in. They took care of us. And while they had to worry about, you know, one of their children, the three of us who were behind, they didn't have to worry about because everybody took care of us. And then, you know, when we were paycheck to paycheck before that, like my mom would write a check down at the grocery store and ask the guy not to cash it till the end of the month. And when you're already in that situation and then you've got a massive healthcare situation, that's kind of hard. So we got super stretched. You know, people down at my mom's prayer group raised money for us. And then when we went bankrupt, I still remember like sitting in our living room and just watching. And if you're from mid-Missouri, you know this, like more lasagna and casserole rolled through the front door than like we could ever eat, and thinking, oh my gosh, like I don't think I can eat any more lasagna after a month or two. But that's just like the magical place where I grew up. And so for me, with this campaign, like my real motivation is that I think we need to fundamentally change who has power in our country, so that it's people like that, people who we grew up with in our neighborhoods, who call the shots, who have the access to all the voting we need, the people who will take care of each other, calling the shots instead of these massive corporations that buy off our politicians so that they write laws that work for them and not for the rest of us. And so that's really where I'm coming from on that. I give you a little bit more of my background. You know, after my family got through that, we did okay. We stayed in the same house, and then you know, I did really well at Jeff City High School. I was actually the first kid to get into Yale University from Jeff City High School, and when I didn't have the money to go, I got a Pell Grant from the federal government, and then people around town actually invented a couple of scholarships so that I could go. So it was really cool, and because again, like you know, we have so many people that do know how to take care of each other. I got to live this magical experience where I went to like a college right out of the movies, right? And I mean, it was, you know, it was awesome. There was some culture shock. You know, when I was growing up, I thought you were rich if you lived like over by the mall in Jeff City and there was like a sign on your neighborhood with a name on it. But when I got to Yale, I realized that there's a whole nother level of very, very big wealth out there. And it was a little bit of an adjustment to have, you know, kids going to like the Swiss Alps for vacation to their parents' place while I'm taking a Greyhound, you know, sleeping in the Port Authority bus station and going down to visit, you know, friends from high school, wherever they ended up. Working several jobs. Although I will say this is a pro tip for anyone who's got kids or grandkids going to college. This was the best thing that I ever did. You can go down to the VA and they will pay you to do experiments down there. And so, like, for example, there was this one experiment where I got to go down there. They pumped me full of Valium and like put me in this dark room with blinking lights. And you took a couple shocks while you were there. But this is the best part. You walk out like completely high with $400 in your pocket. I mean, for a college kid, like I'm telling you, it gets no better than that. So I hope I don't get myself in trouble with that. Anyways, but yeah, so that's the type of thing that I would do in college to try to get by. And then my grandparents were in Columbia. My grandpa was a professor at the university at Mizzou. And, you know, like my dad grew up there. I ended up, so I came back to Mizzou for law school. They were getting early onset Alzheimer's. It was great to hang out with them. I lived on 5th Street down by Jeff Jr., which coincidentally is where my dad went to junior high. So that was kind of fun. And then, you know, near the end of my time in law school, I'd been looking for a way to try to sort of, I guess, honor what everybody in the community had done for me growing up. And so what I finally decided on was to join the Marine Corps. I thought that would be a good way to sort of serve everybody and pay back. And so I did. I became a Marine officer right during the height of the surge in Iraq. You know, I went down to the recruiter and I was like, so what's the process? And he was like, yeah, you just sign your name right here, man. There's no line. We've taken everybody right now. So I signed up and, you know, I went to Marine Corps Rifleman, platoon commander training, everything else. And then sure enough, about 1.5 years after I signed up, I was in Iraq leading a police training team. And so I was leading a team of 12 Marines and a Navy corpsman around central Iraq, towns called Habaniya, Fallujah, Ramadi. And, you know, we were running convoy missions, trying to build that country up so that everybody could come home. It was a great honor to do that. And I'm proud to say that every member of my team made it home safely. And we all were all right, despite doing a lot of missions outside the wire. And then I went to Marine Special Operations Command. They taught me Pashto. And this was the language of Southern Afghanistan. And I went to Afghanistan twice on Special Operations Task Forces, kind of doing the same thing, trying to build that country up. And you know, like, I got to say, people ask me what the hardest thing about those deployments are. When you're a young man, it's sort of an adventure to go overseas. So that was interesting. But I think the hardest thing for me, though, was coming back to my parents' house in Jeff City between the deployments and seeing what was going on down in our old neighborhood. And so, like, I can give you some examples. You know, I came back from Iraq in 2009, and the first house we ever lived in, which was 4 doors down from the one I lived in, joined the Marine Corps out of, was bulldozed down. It's now an empty lot. I come down a few years later. My dad had been unable to find a job after he ended at the Missouri Department of Conservation. He had to move. It took him 2 years to sell the house we grew up in. It only sold for $40,000. You know, he owed 78 on it at the time, despite buying it for 30, you know, in 1988. So tough time. Now it's vacant and abandoned. The corner store is boarded up. The grocery stores, Lee's Corner Market, and then the Gerbs there are both gone. The places, where they would let our family float a check because they knew who we were and that we were good for it. And now, I mean, I hate to think what do you do now if you're in that situation, right? You're going to Walmart for your groceries or somewhere like that, or the Dollar General store. They're never going to let you float a check. And instead, because the way our economy has turned, you got to get a payday loan at like 350% interest rate. And I can tell you right now, like as a family, if we had to get payday loans every time we floated a check growing up, we would have gone bankrupt a lot more than one time. And so I started to get frustrated by that. I spent my last tour at the Pentagon, where I did countering weapons of mass destruction. So I worked with different agencies in the United States government and the military to track people who are trying to proliferate weapons around the world, especially nuclear weapons and missile components. And there's a lot of that going on. And it was nice to try to help keep us safe there. And then I transitioned to becoming an international negotiations officer. And so I actually led our conventional arms control negotiations with NATO and with Russia. So I'd work with interagency to come up with a U.S. policy, or I'd write one, then I'd go over to NATO, get our allies on board, and then I'd go over to the to Vienna, Austria, actually, and really to honor my life, to sit behind the United States of America placard at a table of 59 countries and represent us in these negotiations with Russia, represent the whole country, all of us, and try to really just, the ultimate goal was to try to make it so that the world's more safe, that there are fewer arms in the world, and there's less likelihood of conflict, which, having been to Iraq and Afghanistan, I've seen what little we can get on the amount of money that we spend on conflict. So I'd really like us to not ever be in one again, frankly. And so while I'm doing that, though, I was talking about like seeing my old neighborhood back in Jeff City. I started volunteering at these nonprofits that look at corporate monopoly power. And so what we look at is, like the big agriculture industry that's squeezing out Missouri farmers. We look at, one example is Smithfield, a company that paid off our legislature, Democrats and Republicans actually, to write a law that made it so a foreign country could own land in Missouri again, so that Smithfield could be acquired by China. And now 25% of Missouri's pork production profits go to China. So a bunch of our land is owned by one of our adversaries because they bought people off. And so, we go against big agriculture, we go against pharmaceutical cartels. So that's the people who do things like take the price of insulin from $25 to $275 a dose, which leads to people rationing insulin and dying. I go against national security contractors. So there's some big national security contractors who charge us way too much for bad equipment, really just take money away from programs that like education or things like that I think would be much better for building our country up than just buying a bunch of arms that don't really work that well for a price tag that's way too high. And we do work against big tech too. And so,
Lucas, are you suing these people? How do you go against them?
Yeah, so we do it by several different ways. We work with members of Congress to write legislation. And so for example, I wrote a section. Well, first, it kind of like, I'll write an article. So I wrote an article about militaries and monopolies and how the military is affected by that. And then members of Congress were interested by that. So then I wrote a section of the National Defense Authorization Act that has the Pentagon doing an examination of antitrust and competition policy and how that affects DoD spending and innovation in the national security investment innovation base. So that's one example. We help run like House antitrust subcommittee hearings. So we'll write questions for different hearings in Congress. And so, for example, there was a hearing in the fall that was against Google, Facebook, Apple, and I don't remember the other one, but we wrote the questions for that so that they could go after those CEOs. And now, after that hearing and after this series of anti-tech hearings, there are a bunch of information was compiled by Congress through those, and now a bunch of states' attorney generals are doing lawsuits against Google and Facebook, and DOJ has one against Google and Facebook now too. So what we try to do is we try to pull together all the information and incentivize people to go after these companies, and we've been very successful. in that. We have a website that says that's called Investigate Insulin Now, where we've worked with people like Katie Porter to try to put a bunch of pressure on the insulin cartel to push the price of insulin down. Because, you know, that patent was sold for $1 by the people that invented it because they wanted to make sure everyone had access to this life-saving drug. And you've had 3 pharmaceutical companies just corner the market on it, and they raise the price in lockstep to extract as much as they can out of the consumer. So, so those are some examples. You can find, if you Google me, you can find a lot of writing that I've done. I've done a lot of writing on these issues, particularly related to national security. I recently published an article on the need to move to renewable energy for national security purposes. So, you know, most people don't know this, but for every degree warmer a place is, the likelihood of conflict goes up like 5 or 10%. So as the world warms, there's a higher chance of conflict, which is bad for the military readiness, our need to engage in different places. When I was negotiating arms control with Russia, you know, I would go to NATO first. I think I mentioned that. And one of the things that I found was that sometimes our NATO allies wouldn't go as hard on Russia as we wanted them to because they're using or they're buying a bunch of natural gas and petroleum products from Russia. And so, you know, there's 2 problems with that. One, our allies need to go hard on Russia because Russia's a bad actor. And 2, Western Europe is essentially funding Russia's nuclear weapons program, you know, its hypersonic missiles, its nuclear torpedo program, its military, all its misadventures, because all of their money is buying the petroleum products that then Russia uses to do that. So the, you know, what I think we should do, and this is one of the things I'd like to do, is I call it Marshall Plan the Midwest, after, you know, the way we built up Europe after World War II. And, you know, personally, I watched us spend $6.4 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan and get basically nothing for it. So what I want to do is invest a bunch of money here in the Midwest, Marshall Plan the Midwest. And so it's a jobs creation plan and capital investment plan to make us producers of energy, renewable energy, so that we can, even if it costs more, if we export renewable energy to Europe, we're going to save a ton of money on national security costs because we don't have to worry about Russia meddling around in anything, because if Europe's not buying all their petrochemicals, then Russia's not going to have enough money to do a lot of the bad acts that they do right now. So yeah, that's one of the program. I wasn't planning on getting there yet, but that's a program that I want to do. And yeah, so I wrote an article about that, about the need for us to move to renewables for national security reasons, and a few other things. So I could keep going, but it's more fun probably to answer questions that any of you might have. So let's do that. Yeah, do I call? How's this work? I see a hand from Herb, but I'm not sure what the rules are.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'd like to know more about your policy ideas. Let me ask the question this way. You were part of some talk earlier on about a last night news program on television that absolutely excoriated Missouri's political leadership, focusing mostly on people in state office, but in the past time, they have pointed out the problems of members of the U.S. Senate representing Missouri. And the litany of things took best part of a half hour. And it was shameful about the people in the legislature who are engaged in immoral and potentially illegal actions and so forth, and little done about it. And the inaction of officials of Missouri in addressing real issues, and their expressed first interest in restricting voting, or at least making it more difficult. And I would like to know what you, in your candidacy on the campaign trail and as a U.S. Senator, will do to help make Missouri less of a laughingstock across this country and the world.
Well, I think that the first thing we need to do, and this isn't just for Missouri, but Missouri has really fallen prey to it, is we absolutely need to, we need to end the corporate monopoly domination of our economy. And the reason that we have that is because we have companies who are able to buy off our politicians and use them to write the laws that strip our communities for parts. And I mean, if you want an example of that, Roy Blunt has taken more corporate PAC money than any politician in Missouri history. And he's just written the laws that work for them. You know, his wife's a corporate lobbyist. All of his kids are lobbyists that work for him. So a couple of policies that I would say we need to do to fix that sort of issue is I think we need to abolish corporate PACs altogether. And so for me, I'm not taking any corporate PAC money, but I don't think that all politicians clearly have the willpower to do that. So I think we need to abolish corporate PACs entirely. That may require overturning Citizens United, which I'm all for, and say that corporations aren't people. They don't have rights like people do. Or if we're going to give them rights, then how about we give them some of the responsibilities too? So when we bail them out, they get payday loan interest rates, right? Or something along those lines. Let's actually equalize things a little bit. Or when they commit a crime, then they go to corporate prison for the rest of their life, like a human being does these days. So I think we should do something about that. I think we need to make it so that when lobbyists or anyone other than the legislator writes a law, there's a requirement that they say who wrote the law. We need to have hours logged on what lobbyists lobby for what bill so that we actually have transparency and we can call people out for the corruption that we have going on. When we talk about our other senator, we're talking about Josh Hawley right now. And so, you know, the thing about Josh Hawley is is a faux populist, right? He comes in, he says he's going to do things for working people, everything else, but really what he's doing is he runs on a message that divides people based on race or divides people based on religion or where they grew up. It's a very divisive message. And then he uses the power he gets from that message to actually just do exactly what his corporate donors want. You know, he's voted for every single Trump corporate judge. And he was funded by the Koch brothers when he originally ran. And so I think that what we really need to do is we need to provide a good, strong alternative to that guy. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running for this race. You know, I have credibility. I've spent my entire life in service. I do have a good education. I have some experience with seeing legislative corruption, and I know how to get rid of it. And, you know, I'm not taking corporate PAC money, and I do want to run on a populist message. You know, I'm not here to run on a left versus right message. I'm here to run on a message that says the system is rigged, the system's broken, it's not working for all of us. But, you know, the Josh Hawleys and the Donald Trumps, that's not the solution, because all they're doing is dividing us and leaving the same people in power. We need to actually have people in there who are going to change the system. I mean, you see that with Donald Trump's appointment as National Economic Advisor was Gary Cohn from Goldman Sachs. Like, come on, that's not breaking the link or changing the system. That's what we absolutely need to do. And in order to do that, we need a lot of the transparency plans that I just mentioned. Okay, I don't know if that entirely answered it, but I do see another hand up. So I'll move to Alice, and then Herb, if you want to come back with a follow-up, that's good.
My first thing I just wanted to say is, can you get a stand-in for Sunday? I think we want to hear from your campaign. I'm very excited about a lot of the stuff you've been talking about. I used to work in the State Department. I thought I was going in the Foreign Service, and I like that you're talking about international issues and that you're from, you know, so I'm impressed, and I would like people to get to hear from you. But my question really is about the Voting Rights Act and the filibuster. Where do you stand on this? Missouri ain't going to be in play unless we get some voting rights and affecting our gerrymandered state.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, as a senator, I would get rid of the filibuster to pass any sort of democracy reform. And so there's anything from the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to the more broad, like HR, SR1 stuff. And so I think we need to get rid of the filibuster for that. I'm perfectly happy to do that. And I'm not worried about any backlash. You know, the Republicans got rid of it for all judicial nominees. They didn't have a problem doing that when they didn't want those logged up. And for me, I think, this sounds extreme, but I think we're at a point where it's basically the filibuster versus our democracy, right? And I prefer democracy to the filibuster. Like, the filibuster's not been around for forever. It was invented at some point because it served a purpose, and I don't think it any longer serves that purpose. Right now, it's being used to block democracy, and anyone who wants to limit access to the ballot, I think should be beaten back with whatever tools we have. And if that's abolishing the filibuster, which I think it is, I'm 100% in on that.
Thank you.
Lucas, have you talked to Claire McCaskill?
I haven't, no.
Two,
Maybe you should plan to.
very accessible.
Well, I have planned to, and our team has reached out to her. So
Good.
she has certain, I guess, rules around her MSNBC contract
I see.
that make it more challenging. So
Okay.
we're working on it.
Well, I know very well they're going to call you a socialist. So what would,
Yeah, that's probably true. They're going to call me a socialist. They may put, you know, pictures of burning police cars up. Who knows what? But what I stand for is changing the system. I know who's in control. I'm going to hit them. I'm going to hit everyone over and over again on how we need to fix that, and we need to change that. And for me, I mean, what I work on now, you know, there are fewer smaller businesses in our country than there have ever been. And the reason for that is that we have dominant corporations who are writing the laws that lock out small business owners. And so for me, what I want is an opportunity for everybody to be able to compete again, everybody to have access to markets, everybody to have access to capital. We don't have that right now. And that's, you know, that's not capitalism. I want to bring back something real. I want to make it so that we can have innovation, so that someone can start a small business and not get gobbled up or beat down. I just want us all to have that opportunity. And, you know, that goes for healthcare too. Like, my dad is the smartest, most entrepreneurial guy that I've ever known, right? And when my littlest sister was born and had to have those heart surgeries, he was in the first job he'd ever taken out of school. And he was not able to ever leave that job because he needed to keep that insurance for his little girl. And so he could never go start a small business, even though he wanted to. He could never take his talent or his experience or his knowledge somewhere else, because he had to keep that job. And it was a decent job, but he could have contributed better to the economy doing something else, you know? And when we're all locked into our jobs, or we're locked into our situation because of a lack of universal healthcare, that's not freedom, that's oppression to me. And so I think that things like universal healthcare, they're not socialist at all. That's 100% freedom, if you ask me. It's freedom to go start a small business. It's freedom to not worry about what your employer, what type of healthcare your employer is going to let you have. If you're going to have access to reproductive healthcare or whatever else, you shouldn't have to worry about your employer for that. That should be, that's not freedom to me. And it's the freedom for a small business owner to not spend a great majority of their time trying to figure out what healthcare plan their people are going to have, and also serve as a healthcare manager. You know, if I'm a small business owner, I want to actually run my business and let the business of healthcare be up to somebody else. So, for me, it's all about having free markets again. It's about having freedom, and it's about the ability to just live your best life and really, have every opportunity in our country that you should have. And right now, we don't have that because very powerful people are locking us out for their own personal benefit. Yes, Nancy.
Your life story is just impressive. So please always start with that, because I think it really makes a difference to people to know who you are and where you came from, and that whole part. But can you address what you were just addressing in the realm of agriculture?
Oh, as far as agriculture goes, yeah. So what we've seen is, 4 companies basically run, it's almost the entire world's food supply, but it's definitely America's. And so, it's like Tyson, JBS, I don't remember them exactly, Smithfield, and maybe Monsanto, I think. And so what we have here is in Missouri, Missouri used to be just the land of small farmers. And now it's the land of concentrated animal feed operations. And if you are still a small farmer, oftentimes you're just a subsidiary basically of someone like Tyson. And what they do is they push down the prices for you in order to take more profit. And so what we've seen lately is you can see this in the beef markets. So here's an example. I don't know if you've seen the price of beef in the grocery store lately, but it's up 43% over about a year ago, which is a huge increase, right? Well, how much is the small farmer getting more on beef right now than they were before? 5%. The remaining 38 is being captured by the Meatpacking Association, or by the Meatpackers Guild. And so what you see is you have these very powerful middlemen who have been injected between the farmer and the consumer, who just have created toll booths in order to make a ton of money for themselves and leave the small farmer scrambling and leave us paying more in the grocery store. And, this is all in the name of shareholder profits. It's really pushed by Wall Street, but it's something that we really need to break because it's bad for the great majority of people. And it's really great for people who already have everything they want. So again, this is about freedom, right? Like if you want to be a small farmer, why should you have to turn yourself into a subsidiary of Tyson, grow the chickens exactly like they want the chickens grown, whether you find that oppressive or not, build a barn to their standards, feed them Tyson feed rather than feed that you can buy locally. And if you want to see what effect this has had on our state, just drive to any of the small town squares around our state and see how empty they are, because these major agribusinesses, they don't buy their tractors locally. They don't buy their feed locally. They don't buy any of the inputs locally. They buy it all through a supply chain that they've already created. And if you say raise chickens for Tyson, they make you do the same thing. You have to buy it through their stuff. And so all of our local businesses have just been absolutely destroyed for us here in Missouri in the agriculture sector. And so what I want to do is I want to break them up. I want to make it so that local communities can again have control over their health ordinances. The Republican state legislature changed that so that a couple of years ago with big agriculture lobbying, there used to be, and this is in a lot of very Republican counties, a lot of local health ordinances that kept the concentrated animal feed operations out because it would have polluted the water too much or the air or whatever else. And so what the companies did was they lobbied the state legislature to say local health ordinances are now outlawed. They can't be any more restrictive than the state one. So now we have a bunch more CAFOs going in around the state. And so for me, it's about local control. It's about breaking up the big business. It's about breaking the link. I think this is the most important thing, the link between massive corporations and politics. Because until that link is broken, what are we going to do? They're just going to keep writing the rules that work for themselves. So that's kind of a quick summary on agriculture. I could go deeper, I guess, but I do see Sue has her hand up.
Okay, I just have a quick question. Obviously, a lot of your message is important to the smaller counties, less populated rural counties. How are you getting your message out to them?
Well, we're going there. We're doing, we're also working through social media pretty heavily, and it's weird, with the stages of a campaign, you guys are all diehards and you're very into politics, I suspect, if you're here at a meeting a year and a half out. But the first step is to talk to people like you, because just going on knocking on a door in, Stoddard County, people are like, why are you here? So right now I'm starting with this. We're building the messaging. We're working with groups like the Missouri Rural Crisis Center to come up with good messaging in at least the rural areas. I'm meeting with local nonprofits, leadership in communities to make sure that we're responsive to the needs of people in the communities. So we're doing that in both urban areas and in rural areas. We're engaging with local media to try to build those relationships. And then we're just going to try to tap into people who are already working on the ground right now. There are people who are doing things like deep canvassing around the state, where they go to people's doors and they knock and they talk to them about issues, not about candidates, just to try to educate people so that they know what's going on and who's hurting them. So, yeah, David.
This is maybe more a generic question. I hear a lot of people talking about, a lot of Democrats especially, talking about the importance of free enterprise. I guess I'm going to use that phrase. It sounds like what you're talking about. Let's get small businesses, give them a chance against the big guys, and the CAFOs and foreign ownership. I'm still new enough to this. I don't understand. That sounds to me like we're not allowing free enterprise. If these people are out there already and they've been successful, now we're saying, no, we don't want foreign ownership. To me, isn't that free enterprise, allowing whoever wants to buy the land? Can you speak philosophically about that?
Once companies get big enough, they stop innovating and they stop competing, and all they do is crush competitors. And so you can do that by undercutting people on prices. So you'll say, no, I'm not, like you're going to charge, like if a competitor springs up and they have a better product or they have a better system, you can just undercut them on prices for a little while. Then that business dies, and then you lift your prices back up. And so an example of that is Amazon and diapers.com. So diapers.com had a good business online. Amazon tried to buy diapers.com. Diapers.com said no. And so Amazon put a bunch of under cost price diapers on Amazon until diapers.com almost went out of business, and then they bought diapers.com. And so this happens all the time with these big industries. It happens in farming. You undercut small farmers so that you can then buy their land and grow your large corporate agricultural business into an even larger one. It happens, one of the things we see with seed is, like Monsanto is a good example on this, now owned by Bayer, where the seed is all genetically modified. And so a farmer can no longer save seed from their crops. They have to go back to Monsanto each year to buy them, and they can charge whatever price they want because they patented the seeds. And so you see that situation. Another one with like John Deere, for example, is the right to repair. And this is actually the same with your iPhone or anything else. So when a company has big enough market power, what they do is they also try to capture the maintenance and sustainment train so that they do all of the maintenance, all of the repairs on the equipment. And there are plenty of small people who know how to fix a tractor. So what John Deere or someone else does is they add a computer system with a secure code that someone else can't get through, or they design it so that it requires specialized tools. That's called predatory design. And then they don't sell anybody else the tools unless they become a subsidiary of John Deere. So really, it's about power and it's about rent seeking rather than it is about innovation and creating better products. And so I started to see this in the Department of Defense, where 67% of our major contracts have no competition at all. So the DoD, no matter how big we are, ends up being a price taker from these big corporations because there's no competition, because they've managed to squeeze out all the competition. And every time like a new radar system or something else like that comes up, one of the bigger companies will buy that company, will buy them out, and you'd be dumb not to sell, because if you don't get bought out, you're going to get squeezed out through some of the methods I just mentioned. So they get bought out and then they shelve the technology. And so what you have is you got a lot of technology on the shelf. And like a historic example of this is AT&T Bell Labs after World War II. So AT&T Bell Labs partnered with the federal government to come up with all sorts of technology during the war. And then they just, since their main focus was just the telephone, they just stored all of that technology and didn't let it out. So DOJ went after them. There was a consent decree in the 1950s, I think it was 53, that says, what you're going to do now is, since you have all this monopoly technology that, by the way, the federal government funded, we're going to break open your patent vault and make it so that you have to license that to everybody. And so because of that, Silicon Valley was created, solar panels were created, all of these products that are still great products today, the semiconductor actually. And so what you see is when companies just sit on technology or they're in a very powerful position, we don't have innovation and growth anymore. And what you have is just stagnation. And so that's why countries like China are able to advance past us. That's why now Taiwan is the epicenter for semiconductors in the world. We can't make semiconductors as well as Taiwan anymore. And when COVID hit, there was a shortage of semiconductors. And now our manufacturing of automobiles, medical devices, and everything else is stalled out because there aren't enough semiconductors there coming from there, and we don't know how to make them anymore. So really, when you get big enough, it's not a free market anymore. What you have is you have private regulation, you have private control of the market. And so if you ask me, I would rather have voted elected representatives deciding what the rules are going to be than massive corporations whose only goal is to seek profit for Wall Street. Because, at least one, we have some element of control over. On the other one, only shareholders have control over. And by the way, 40% of shareholders in American companies are foreigners. So it's not exactly a situation for success. At least not for us. It's great for Wall Street. Don't get me wrong. Some people succeed wildly with this.
I don't know if you can see my hand, but
oh, I can't see quite everybody. So
yeah, so I'll just pipe up. I just wanted to add that I think the discussion of corporatization is basically a question of values. And as you said, that shareholders are one group who benefits from this, but our values in the past have always involved community, workers, all the other factors that make up our society and our economy. And
Absolutely.
those are not valued in the economic system, which they really are not at this point.
No. And I agree with you. And an example of that is, General Electric has been the king of outsourcing for the last 20 years. And while receiving $160 billion, that's with a B, $160 billion of state and federal subsidies, loans, et cetera, they have offshored almost their entire workforce. And these are the people, you've seen lately, if you were paying attention, recently a pipeline was hacked by Russia. And actually that one might've been China. And then there was a solar winds hack, which affected a bunch of electric utility companies and other ones. And so one of the problems we have now, like say with GE offshoring, is they're moving all these jobs to places like Poland or South Korea or wherever else that are closer to our adversaries, where our adversaries have more access, where they can put backdoors into our electric grid, and then we'll be vulnerable in the future. And when you talk about workers, like we had this amazing, unionized, skilled labor force in our country. And every time we outsource jobs and those workers end up doing something less skilled, we lose a national security asset, which is our skilled labor force. And it's not replaceable. It's not replaced, and it's not replaceable. I interviewed a guy who works in metallurgy who says we can't make the metal for our submarines anymore because we've shipped so much of our metallurgy expertise overseas. And it's the same with the semiconductors, right? We used to make semiconductors. And then as it shifted to Taiwan and we only became designers of semiconductors at TSMC in Taiwan, every new generation of semiconductor manufacturer, they got expertise, they figured things out, and we didn't learn it all, and we fell behind on that technology, and now we can't do it. So I absolutely agree with you. It used to be about community, about workers and other things, and now it's strictly about pure profit, and that doesn't work because there's so many externalities and so many external costs to everything that simplification leaves us behind. And countries like China know that, and they take advantage of that. They offer incentives for people to move their business and their manufacturing to China because China knows it works for them long term, and that our shareholders only see the dollar signs, so they just move. They don't see all the other costs to our country.
Wally has his hand up.
Yes, perhaps you can't see my name, my hand either, but let me try to get a quick question in
Sure.
with you, Mr. Kunce. We are approximately 160 years or so beyond the Emancipation Proclamation. Yet African Americans are lagging significantly behind still in education, employment, and wealth. That group leads, however, in negative interaction with law enforcement and the judicial system. What would you do to change those dynamics? And how do you plan to appeal to that, to the African American segment of the population?
Absolutely. One of the things I didn't mention about the neighborhood I grew up in, it was right next to Lincoln University. People called it Chocolate City sometimes. And so my neighbor on the left was black, neighbor on the right was black. I went to Second Baptist in the summers, and I saw exactly what you were talking about. And, I've seen how kids I grew up with were left behind, and how they got in more trouble in school, how punishments weren't equal and things like that. And so I think that what I would like to do as part of my Marshall Plan of the Midwest is what I want to do is do a pilot program in an urban core majority Black area, probably North St. Louis or North County, where we see what it's like to inject capital there, give access to capital, build, sorry, am I getting an echo, or is someone not on mute? But really build in that community. And so when I was talking about before, in my old neighborhood, the grocery stores are gone. Where are you going to go now? Like a Dollar General equivalent. The houses are boarded up. The only new houses that are being built are Habitat for Humanity houses, actually. You know, as they come down, as the old ones come down, that's what springs up in their place. And so what I think one of the big tragedies that the Black community has right now is that there's really no legacy left to children, right? Everybody, there's no like generational wealth, there's no legacy. It's all, everybody is paycheck to paycheck, like we grew up in my old family, and you're basically running a race to try to get ahead where you already started behind. And so, you know, there's a myriad of programs that can help with that. Universal pre-K is one of them. I think we should probably go back even further so that it's from basically from birth till school starts. There are opportunities for people to join into programs. I think that as far as interaction with police go, we need community responders for many of the types of situations that end up escalating into criminal situations, but maybe never even started that way to begin with. I think that we need really just to make great investments in these areas, and we need to repair the system. I mean, when you, again, I know it seems, maybe it seems silly to tie everything back to like corporate monopoly power, but like redlining of certain areas for getting loans was done by large corporate monopolies. The banking system has killed most Black-owned banks so that they don't exist anymore. That's who used to own to loan to Black businesses. There are, when I say there are fewer smaller businesses than ever before, you know, small businesses used to be the foundation and the core of Black communities, and they're just completely wiped out right now. Most of the, like if most Black small business owners end up being franchisees right now and just having a franchise where you're almost working for minimum wage for a large corporation. And so we need to make it so that we have access to capital and access to markets for everybody, but particularly Black communities. And so just bringing that all around again, like the Marshall Plan for the Midwest is injecting capital here in the Midwest and communities that have been left behind. I want to do two pilot programs. One would be a rural one, and one would be an urban one, where we can give people ownership of, you know, the means of production, opportunity, and access to capital, and try to create sort of a paradigm for how we can go all around the country to really build these areas back up and repair a system that is essentially left, you know, if you're Black, it's like being born in a casino, right? Like you're always playing against the house, and the odds are not in your favor. So I think we need to work on it. But those are some of the ideas I have right now. You know, our organization has done a lot of investigation into corporate monopoly power and the impact on Black communities, and we have some proposals for that. And I'd like to work with local communities to figure out where best to do those and how to modify them for the area.
Mary Jo has a question.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you feel about immigration?
Well, I mean, when I think about immigrants, I think about my best friend growing up whose parents worked at Lincoln University and were refugees from the Eritrean Ethiopian Civil War, you know, who came here, contributed to society, had 2 kids who do great things, you know, like my best friend, he's now, I don't know if you know Bishop Jakes, TD Jakes, he just was his comm director for a long time and just transitioned jobs, like very good job. I think about when I went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and you know, people who had moved here from Iraq, fleeing Saddam Hussein, or people who had fled the Taliban to get away from Afghanistan, then were willing to go back unarmed to be interpreters to help their adopted country and their service members survive over there. I think about the Marines and service members when I did legal assistance at Camp Pendleton, who came from a different country and then joined their adopted country's military and were trying to get citizenship after deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, some of them who had Purple Hearts. So for me, I see a lot of contribution to society. We're a country of immigrants, and I think we would be very foolish to turn away people who contribute to our society. And as a senator, I do everything I can to support legislation that protects children, reunites families, you know, puts undocumented immigrants who pass a background check on a path to citizenship, all that sort of stuff. I think we can build a better, stronger America with immigrants and with our communities who've been left behind.
Pam has a question.
What is your position on guns?
I mean, I think we need to have background checks. I mean, criminal background checks and mental health background checks have been proven to be the single most effective thing for preventing gun violence. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, there've been tons of studies on it. It's shocking that we don't have it already. You know, it's like 80% of people support that. So my priority on guns would be to get that passed. Nancy?
Nancy has a question.
I want to touch briefly on education. I would assume you're very pro public education.
Yeah, public education got me there. I tell you what, Jeff City High School, and then really getting to go to college too. I mean, a Pell Grant, you know, that's what you get if you're under a certain income level to help you go to college. And without that assistance, I don't know how it would have worked out for me. So I think we absolutely have to invest in our public schools and in making it so that people who want to go to college can go to college without coming away with a crushing debt burden that leaves our economy behind and just leaves them struggling for years. And, you know, you see that. I mean, this is another one. Communities of color have been hit very hard by for-profit universities taking advantage of people wanting to go to college, be the first person to go to college in their family, getting a massive debt load, and then not getting the sort of jobs they were promised when they were done.
Looks like we have time maybe for one or two more questions.
Alice?
So you also touched on debt from college, and so maybe you could comment on that. If $10,000 was cut, it would affect 33% of borrowers, many of people of color, because they maybe borrowed less. Secondly, I was going to ask something else, and I can't think what it is. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I've been really excited by your candidacy and the issues you've talked about today. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm really glad that you all invited me. I'm sorry I can't make it to the picnic. I didn't find out about it until just like very shortly beforehand. And like I said, we already had a big thing with a bunch of people going to it. And as my mother said, growing up, even if you'd rather do something else, you know, you've got to go with your prior commitment. And so I'm not gonna break a prior commitment, but I'm sure there will be other opportunities. I really hope so.
Did you want to comment on the possibility of student cutting student?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think $10,000 should be a floor, not a ceiling, right? We need to figure out. I haven't gone into it deep enough to see like what the exact number should be, if there should be income thresholds, what we're going to do on that. But I think we need to make it so that the debt load doesn't crush people who didn't get the benefit of the bargain anymore. And I think we need to make it so that going forward, people aren't put into that situation again, whether that's 2 free years of college, whether it's free community college, whether it's some sort of subsidy for 4-year. I haven't, we're still working out our platform on some issues. And that's one where we want to get it right. So we're doing our homework on it, but it's absolutely a problem and we will address it.
The other part of my question was just on the infrastructure bill. Biden wants to put money behind helping seniors with care at home, something critically needed for us baby boomers that didn't save, and that's really under attack, apparently. That part of
I don't know why that would be. This is the same sort of thing as Medicaid expansion being attacked in the state, right? Like it's a benefit to everybody to have that. It creates jobs. It helps people out. Medicaid, obviously in the state, you're paying $120 million to get 1.4 billion or whatever it is. And so it's just, it's a politicized issue. I support everybody having the healthcare they need. I'll be on that side of it in every issue. I mean, as someone who came from a family who went bankrupt from healthcare bills, this is a very important issue to me. And then as someone whose grandparents ended up getting Alzheimer's and needed an in-home caretaker and seeing how much that cost, that's another one that I think we need. So
Thank you.
But as far as the real thing about the crux of the infrastructure bill is this is massive corporations, again, looking for whatever they can to attack it because they don't want the corporate tax rate to go up to 27%. Like that's it. Every attack on that, every politician who's attacking it, it's because there's a corporation behind them that doesn't want it to go up to 27%. And now I'm really going to get fired up because like Raytheon, a massive defense contractor, came out and said, you know what, we spend $5 billion a year on research and development. Well, if you raise our tax rate to 27%, that means $1 billion we can't spend on research and development. And then the CFO went to his earnings call and talked to the shareholders about how they were planning on doing $5 billion of share buybacks over the next couple of years. So if they got $5 billion to do share buybacks, I'm sorry, what we're doing by not raising it to 27% is we're subsidizing their share buybacks. And they're going to say it's about research and development. So anyway, that's what any attack on that infrastructure bill is about. It's all, yeah.
Herb?
Want to thank you very, very much for coming before us today. Also, would like to reinforce, it'd be good for you to make contact with Claire. She should not endorse you under the MSNBC rules. That's not the point. But there's lots of good stuff to be got from the contact. And if you in your career, and I'm sure it was the case, had to learn how to extract useful information and whatever it is, while steering around differential access to security classified information, and I know you face that, she has too, then you can steer around the MSNBC issues.
Thanks, Herb.
Tell her
We're
Herb
definitely working on it.
Tell her
I
Herb
want to
said.
talk to everybody. I want to talk to everybody, and she is on the list. For
Good.
sure.
But in fact, do say hello to her for me.
Thank you.
And do send somebody, if you can come up with somebody that could be there to represent you, would be great.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we can probably do that. I'm going to have Caleb, my campaign manager, is on here, so
I saw that.
he's texting us out. And we can't do this without your help, so I'm gonna ask you guys to donate. The link's right there. It's not going to happen without you. It's a big thing we're trying to do here. So there's my ask.
Excellent. Very good. Caleb, thank you. Glad to see you showing up. I may have been there all along. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting now at 1:15. I think I've got 1:16, so I don't want to tie people up. And we do have an executive committee meeting. Let's all give a big hand to Lucas. I appreciate it, Lucas. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
You bet.
Thank you. You're obviously well informed, and we appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. Gotta be.
If we didn't have our officers meeting, I'd say that's good. Usually we'd just kind